This would be the last time. I took a deep breath and prepared myself for the smell. It had a radius all around the house. As I opened the door, I saw my brother at the top of the steps, his gut hanging out over his belt as he pointed the barrel of his rifle at me. Are you fucking serious right now? I asked. He chuckled with contempt and said,
I didn't know it was you. You should have called ahead.
He took his finger off the trigger and pointed the barrel away from me. I come here every week at the same time. You know this. I yelled at him as the smell of dog urine started to overpower my stomach. I walked through the kitchen and into the back room. It was coated in dog shit. He was letting the dogs use his back room instead of taking them outside. I wanted him to be better than this. Anything but this. I walked out the back door and gasped into the fresh air. His chickens were squawking at the sight of a human. The door opened behind me, and his dogs ran into the chicken pen. The smallest dog enjoyed picking fights with the rooster. He was white, with mud in his coat, but seemed happy. The rooster less so. After a quick tussle, the white dog ran back into the house with a whimper. The rooster stood triumphant, although it had left the humans alone. He had been hit by my brother's cane enough times to get the message.
I wanted to run something by you,
my brother said, as he filled a bucket full of chicken feed and walked into the coop, spreading it out to his flock.
I'm looking at a house to buy, but I'm having a little trouble with the down payment. I wanted to know if I could borrow about $5,000. I'll pay you back at 8% interest. That's better than any Imperial bank on this planet.
I nodded, stone-faced. I'll think about it, Tom, is all I said. I had just gotten a decent job, but I didn't start yet till tomorrow. He was hitting me up already. I knew he'd never pay me back. Never mind the 2 times he went bankrupt, he could barely make rent.
Well, let me know. Houses don't stay on the market very long these days.
He told me, as if he was going to do something else with his life. I wanted him to get it together. I kept coming around, hoping he would.
You ready to go?
He asked me as the feed bucket was emptied. I nodded and walked around the side of his house where my car was parked. I couldn't do another trip through the back room. He got into the passenger side, and I buckled my seatbelt. I looked over to him and noticed he hadn't. Tommy, you got to buckle your seatbelt, man. He rolled his eyes and complied.
Our uncle would be rolling in his grave.
You mean our uncle, the terrorist? First of all, you not wearing a seatbelt does not make you a freedom fighter. It makes you die like a moron. Secondly, you and I both were in the Human Soldiers of Earth, so I don't know why you find terrorists cool all of a sudden. We spent the rest of the ride in silence after that. My brother was from the lower caste, and they were often emotionally invested in weird revolutionary fantasies. It didn't matter that the Rough Riders had been missing for 20 years. I turned on the radio. Shit. Jim Green was on.
Hello there, fellow travelers. Senator John Hook is letting 100,000 blue-skinned refugees into North America to take away jobs from you. Why? Why? They won't work at all. All they'll do is take what little food you have on your table. And Hook will hold a gun to your head until the blue-skins are full. Never mind the HSE veterans that live on the street. Veterans that fought the Blueskins for 20 years. Never mind the working man who lives paycheck to paycheck. Now the Blueskins will be supported by your paycheck. But don't worry, fellow travelers. Rough Rider 6 is in direct communication with me and has assured me that the next uprising is just around the corner.
I took a deep breath and rolled my eyes. Jim Green played to the crowd of people that screamed at imperial librarians for not carrying copies of the United States Constitution.
Can you believe that idiot wants to allow more of those blue-skinned refugees into human territory?
My brother asked me as the world passed him by outside the window.
We spent 20 years fighting them, and he wants to bring them here.
We spent 20 years occupying a pre-industrial planet to strip it for FTL crystals. The only reason they pulled out was because there were no more FTL crystals to strip mine from the planet. The least we could do is let their people start over here on Earth.
Not if all they want is a fucking handout.
My brother said as we pulled into the food pantry. I didn't bother pointing out the irony. The line stretched outside the door. As we got closer, the smell of my brother's clothes melted into the stench of the free food line. Lines like these were common in my life. I hated begging. I hated him more for putting us in that position, but I wanted to love him, so I protected his ego from the obvious. And as the line continued and we collected our free boxes of food, I realized I protected him because it allowed me to pretend, and I hated myself for being such a coward. So this would be the last time. I said that last week. Maybe I'll say it again next week. Who knows?
Hello, stranger. Do you like to read?
Read? What's happening? Am I dead?
I bet you like zombie books.
I like food. Do you have food?
You don't need food at dividedbyzerobooks.com. It's full of nutrient-rich science fiction.
Ugh, I'm stuck in an ad, aren't I?
Once I stop talking, reality will collapse until someone plays this ad again. This isn't the first time we've had this discussion, and it won't be the last. Hello, stranger. Do you like to read?
I was born into the lower caste, a charity hospital that the oligarchs used as a tax write-off. Not that I was complaining. That was how the game was played. I learned to play the game myself after I got off active duty and went to university. I found a good wife and a government job with access to imperial hospitals. Life in the upper caste wasn't super complicated. Don't spend more than you make. Take a bath. Show up to things on time. People made it harder than it had to be. I got out of bed, mentally calculating my morning chores. The litter box on the second floor, raising the blinds on the first, the dehumidifier in the basement, watering the garden, watch out for the poison ivy, run the dishwasher, make her lunch, cook the potatoes for breakfast. She loved potatoes. An hour later, Marilyn got out of bed to the smell of frying bacon.
There you are,
she said, smiling. I flipped the bacon in the crackling pan and said, "Here I am." Her arm slipped around my waist as she asked me,
"How did it go with your brother yesterday?"
I sighed and told her about as well as last week. She squeezed me tighter and told me,
"You're a good man."
I hope so. She released me from her iron grip and took the plate of potatoes. My multifunction device beeped. A notification from the newsfeed. 37 arrested at the Jim Green rally for disorderly conduct in downtown Indianapolis. I checked the names of the dead. My brother wasn't one of them. He wasn't on the list of the arrested either. My heart skipped a beat. He was at large.
What's wrong?
I could feel my chest get tight. I could feel the stress bleed into my fingertips, just like last time, just like every time he came back into my life. The Green Rally was busted up by the cops. She held my hand and squeezed it.
Your brother made his choice. Now you make yours.
I couldn't save him. He didn't want to be saved. A half hour later, I was 10 minutes early into the office, but my shoes didn't feel right. They were comfortable, of course. They were running shoes. But I was waiting in a room. I felt ashamed of my approved running shoes issued to me by the human soldiers of Earth last year. The only other pair of shoes I owned were old HSE combat boots.
Trevor Carmichael?
Asked a man with nice shoes. I stood up and said, "Yes, sir."
I think between the two of us, you can just call me Eli. Pleasure to meet you, Trevor. Let me show you around.
I followed him through the door and was struck by how run down the place looked. The old carpet with the blood stains in it, the light bulb that hung free from the ceiling tile, the 15 empty desks that filled a quiet office space, a large desk in the back of the office with a comfortable chair.
Most of our work now is done by algorithm, which I programmed. Senator Hook told you what job you applied for.
I shook my head and said, "He just told me to apply and not ask any questions."
Yeah, that sounds like him. Officially, this is an office of the Imperial Senior Citizen Pension Committee. Since the anti-cannibalism bill passed, we have to figure something else out for the old people on this planet.
My hands didn't shake like my brother's. I never had to eat human meat.
Unofficially, our job here is to keep society stable. That boils down to figuring out what people want and giving it to them. Most people want to live in the least amount of discomfort they can stand, which currently means clean water and not having to eat human meat. If 80% of the population lives there, they will go about their day and die quietly of cancer instead of hunger. Well, there's 10% with ambition. Most of these are from the lower caste and move up the system through the human soldiers of Earth. 1% of those find their way to us.
The military is a social mobility system?
I mean, it's also a military. Like, we just finished stripping the planet of FTL crystals. We couldn't just send mining teams there without occupying the place.
Why are we allowing refugees? I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm all for it after what we did there, but it's just going to make the lower caste angry, I told him as he opened a bottle of something brown and poured me a glass. I smiled and accepted the glass, waiting for him to pour his own before I started sipping on mine. Damn, that was good bourbon.
That's exactly the point. That's where the newsfeed comes in. See, there's always a bottom 10% in any society that will never quite conform. They need an organizing principle that keeps them focused. That used to be the Rough Riders. No, the Empire didn't start the Rough Riders, but we never finished them either. Keeping them alive kept the lowest of the lower caste focused on a controlled detonation. The Empire would let them rattle their sabers and scream about freedom. If people believed there was a human opposition voice to the Empire, they could live in that belief, and it would be enough. So he programmed the AI bot that creates the new Jim Green content.
Jim Green is an Imperial bot?
Yep. The visual facial structure was based off a blend of my father and a barber he knew in university. That's how one man can have 3 broadcasts per day.
I took a sip of the bourbon and said, "Yeah, but he says the same thing every day. The Empire is bad and the next great uprising is just around the corner."
That's all they need to hear. We throw in some positive messages about the HSE, since so many of them serve the Empire. Gives them something to be proud of.
Yeah, but the HSE is ran by the Empire. How can they hate one but love the other? It's all the same soup.
It's in those contradictions that we keep society stable. Jim Green's videos help us keep track of those most unstable and focus them in one direction. Your brother's on that list, by the way.
You manipulated him?
If we didn't, someone else would have. You're on the other list, by the way. The top 10% who move up. I figured you'd turn down the job. Well, the algorithm did. You'll probably find a job somewhere in food distribution to the lower caste and be a credit to your community.
You don't know the future.
I don't. But the algorithm does. I know that Jim Green has called his Indianapolis supporters to a rally today. Your brother has a 99% chance of going. You had a 99% chance trying to stop him and being late for work. But you seem like a 1%er to me.
Eli had a ping pop from his pocket. He pulled his MTF out and said,
"This is Eli."
He nodded 3 times and ended the call.
"Trevor, I wish we didn't have to do this now, but we don't have a choice. Listen carefully. Your brother is here. We think he's armed. The building is being evacuated."
Behind me, I heard a door open. I stood up out of the desk and walked into the empty row of cubicles. My brother came into the room, pointing a knife at me. At least it wasn't a shotgun this time.
What are you doing here?
Have you hurt anyone yet?
I will if they force me to.
Who forced you to come here?
I have my orders.
Tom said, puffing his chest out.
I'm a Rough Rider now. I'm important in the organization, Trevor.
Oh, Tom. Jim Green isn't real.
He's real. I just spoke to him.
Tom told me, crossing his arms.
Green is an AI program designed by this office. He's a release valve, just like the Rough Riders were. The Empire, by design, let the Rough Riders live so they could funnel the troublemakers all into one place. That's what Jim Green does. That's why you're here.
Silently, a small automatic laser rifle descended from the building.
So what? I'm stupid?
He asked Eli, gripping the knife. I kept looking up at the rifle, hoping Tom wouldn't make any sudden moves. But I didn't tell him to watch out. He made his choice, and I made mine. Eli shrugged and said,
Just the target demographic. We follow what you say and do on the news feed. Jim Green planned the rally today because we wanted him to. You're here because we wanted to take you in without killing you, as a favor to our new employee.
Tom ran his hands through thinning hair. His eyes darted back and forth, trying to make sense of it all.
This is a trick,
He said, looking at me.
I am a Rough Rider. You're one of them now. You betrayed me. Everyone betrayed me.
The automatic rifle fired one shot directly at my brother's heart. In an instant, his confused and angry eyes went blank. His body fell to the floor with a muffled thud. I ran to him and shook his shoulders, begging him to wake up, pleading with Eli to get help. Nothing could be done. The laser pistols were deadly. That was the point. But what was the point of my brother's blood smeared all over the carpet? General Arthur MacArthur stood behind William Howard Taft as he signed the surrender papers. The aliens had won. MacArthur cried with the rest of the cabinet while Taft lowered the flag. Half of those men were soon heading to London to help set up the Center for Human Governance. There was not much use in regret. Their souls had been bought by promises of continued status. They all had work to do. Those in power went about the business of reorganizing the human race. The Empire decreed that there would be an upper caste who kept the trains running on time, a middle caste who would conduct the trains, and a lower caste who would clean the trains if they didn't get too talkative. No one likes a chatty servant. Religion was outlawed, although the lower caste prayed in secret. Faith in God kept the poor hopeful for a better life on the next round. The middle and upper caste didn't mind too much if they were comfortable. Faith in God was beneath their station. The Center for Human Governance then created a fourth caste. Since the occasional usefulness that was born in the refugee camps needed a societal mechanism for moving up the ladder, the Human Soldiers of Earth was established. They came with food and blankets and promises of duty and honor and glorious purpose. Tall, strong men in matching berets atop obedient horses rode gently into the refugee camps outside of Chicago, letting the broken remains of the Americans get a good look at strength. The old men remembered being strong. The young men were raised on tales of glory. There was no glory to be had in the Chicago camps, not where Taft signed the surrender. So those young men stood in line to enlist, thankful to escape the camps, and ready to have a life of meaning, even if it meant working for the Empire. And soon, troop ships left Lunar Dock to worlds awaiting liberation. The Empire had never had subjects like the humans. While the droids used to liberate the Earth required no food, the humans made up for that additional cost with centuries of cultural instinct for conquest. This made them the pride of the Empire. On the 10-year anniversary of liberation, the Rough Riders, so named in honor of Teddy Roosevelt, began conducting insurgent campaigns across the planet. The remnants of the old world came back from out of the shadows and attacked the New Order. They drew the attention of the civilian population. While most humans had found their pride again in the human soldiers of Earth, there will always be those who refused to conform. Their anger would lead them to self-destruction, but with a quick stop at the Rough Riders along the way. The Center for Human Governance saw potential in this. An underdog story to give hope to a lower caste that no longer prayed in secret. A block to keep the knife sharp, so that the human soldiers of Earth never got complacent. Commandant Arthur MacArthur put out a directive: never kill the last Rough Rider. After all, a hopeful populace was an obedient populace. Once upon a timeline, Winston D. Carmichael was only 16 years old when he left Earth for his first deployment. And on that deployment, once the human soldiers of Earth had finished liberating the local townsfolk, Winston became close friends with a man in his platoon named Jimmy. Winston noticed something. Jimmy always seemed to have an extra protein bar on him. He was stealing from the chow hall. Which, Earthside? This wouldn't have been that big of a deal. But far across the galaxy, every calorie was accounted for. Jimmy had told Winston what had happened, what he had done. He had offered Winston some extra food because they were so hungry that Winston could feel it in his stomach, in his fingertips. He could feel the pain. He could feel the burning. But this man had stolen food from the platoon, from the company. Winston knew what that meant. Winston knew the punishment, so Winston went to his first sergeant and told him what this man had done, this friend. He was sentenced to consumption. Jimmy begged for his life, for a chance, for a bullet. The first sergeant told him no. There would be no forgiveness for stealing food. Take your punishment and love your empire. They offered Winston the chance to participate. He told them no. He wouldn't eat his friend no matter what the Imperial Handbook said, no matter what society told him was okay. He knew it was wrong. No matter what his friend did, he couldn't eat him not while he was still alive. And so they gave him Jimmy's belongings. They gave him Jimmy's rations as a thanks for maintaining imperial order and loving the Empire. James Norman Mattis grew up in the unincorporated Washington Territory of the Pacific Northwest. During his many weeks as a young man spent outdoors, Jim Mattis would look up at the night sky and see a shining beacon beckoning him. Of course, in between him and that shiny beacon was an occupying fleet that circled the planet. a fleet that only got stronger after the Great Uprising in Hawaii. From before he was born, news of human armies, human soldiers rising up against the alien occupying masters of the earth stuck with the young Jim Mattis as he bartered for ammunition and oil, staring at the ruins of the old world in what used to be Seattle. Jim Mattis learned of the Rough Riders at the dinner table through the excited imagination of his father, a man who grew up in the old world, understanding the promise of America. Jim saw his father meet with other men and speak of revolution. Unfortunately for his father, his newfound compatriots didn't quite have the stomach for a proper revolution. So when the time came to meet at the town square with American flags, screaming stories of how the humans shall rise again, Jim's father found himself very alone, standing tall next to a broken monument of George Washington. After watching his father be dragged away into the re-education camps and seeing the gibbering mess that resulted a year later when he came home, Jim Mattis knew in his heart where the Rough Riders stood in the grand scheme of things. And so on his 18th birthday, he found himself at the basic training camp for the human soldiers of Earth, because he knew there, in a uniform, he had status, he had security, he would have food. But Jim knew the trade-off: a grateful life spent in service to an ungrateful empire. An empire that had enough money for opulence and parades and banquets, but never quite enough money to rebuild a liberated Earth. The empire didn't give him too much time to ponder the fairness of its policies, because right after basic combat training, he was sent back home. Well, close enough. There was a colony in California where the locals were attracting a sort of rough riding attention, as the commandant put it. Jim Mattis had a reputation for being quite the woodsman, so he was selected to infiltrate the camp, learn which way the revolution was blowing. On paper, it all sounded very nice. A certain poetic nobility to human-led success. It also reminded him of the stories his father would proclaim to be the way, the truth, and the light at the dinner table, before the Empire showed him just what human resistance looked like. So at that camp of insurgents on the west coast of North America called Berkeley, they spoke of long-dead philosophers, of equality of outcome, of seizing the means of production. All of these things, this life of shared work, of shared result, it all sounded very good on paper. But for such a egalitarian utopia, they sure didn't like Jim asking questions, of wondering why he had to give so much of his food to the group, of why some people looked a little bit thinner than others, of why some people seemed to have had a fourth meal or a fifth meal. Some lived in better homes than others. Some were more equal than others. Jim Mattis brought this up during a struggle session, wondering why he couldn't have a second apple with breakfast. Yes, the limit was 1 apple per 1 worker, but why couldn't it be 2? The comrade leader did not like this line of questioning, told him that his questions were anti-revolutionary, but he still asked the question. Why couldn't they have more than 1 apple? This was California. There's nothing but apples here. This made others ask the same question. Why couldn't they have a second apple? Why did the leader always seem to have an extra apple in his pocket? Why does the leader get a house to himself? Why do we sleep in tents? If we're all equal, why isn't the leader in a tent with us? The leader did not like this line of questioning. Didn't like the riot that started, the mob that chased him to his home. Didn't like the fire and the locked door. Jim Mattis liked it, though. For want of an apple, he crushed a revolution.
these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That was tattooed on his left arm since David McAllister was a boy in Cumberland, Kentucky. He didn't cry. Mom told him not to let outsiders see weakness, otherwise the cannibals would get him in the night. That was how his father died. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. David was 10 when he heard his father scream as the cannibals ate him, slowly and with precision. The blood never came out of the walls. They had nowhere else to go. The human soldiers of Earth offered a way out of poverty, as long as you acknowledged your sin of being a human and asked for forgiveness of your individuality. To be an individual was to stand against the empire. David understood that the acknowledgement of sin was a submission to authority, a way to control the lower caste. Those in power wanted to define you based on their own terms, and that kept them in charge, while all you had was your rage. Men stood in line for hours, offering their life to the empire in exchange for a stable food source. The same men that spoke of freedom and fraternity traded their morals for a burger and a beer. David couldn't hate himself enough to sell his soul like that. But he also didn't want to spend his life suffocating in a coal mine. So there was another table that David found, hidden in a bombed-out factory. A shorter line, angrier men. A recruiting sergeant for the Rough Riders that promised justice. A piece of paper for David to sign. We hold these truths
to be
self-evident,
that all men
are
created equal.
His recruiting sergeant taught him how to make bombs, how to kill quietly, to believe in a country that no longer existed. The rifle that felt heavy in his hands. The concrete walls of the Cincinnati schoolhouse seemed incomplete, the windows far too open. The human soldiers of Earth were coming. The sky would be full of drop ships soon. The ground covered in their fire. No going home. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Are created equal.